It is Tuesday, March 10th, and this is Washington in Focus Daily. I'm Carleen Johnson, the Center Square's state government correspondent. And this day will go down in legislative history for the longest floor session in Washington history. As even right now, members of the Washington House are debating amendments, many amendments, ahead of a final vote on the income tax bill. This is Senate Bill 6346 for a 10% tax on income above $1 million or combined household income above $1 million. Also going to hit small businesses, ideas to bring in more than $3 billion a year, um, starting in 2029. And so we're going to get into some of the amendments being, for the most part, summarily rejected by the majority. Most were offered by Republicans as they attempted to kind of dull this bill. But it has been an epic night. They started at 5:30 on Monday evening, and they went all night, and they're still going today. So, as we speak, they're on hour 18 or 19, I believe, going straight. So, lots of coffee, lots of Diet Coke cans, lots of energy drinks. It's interesting. Then we're going to talk about the passage of engrossed Senate Bill 5068. This bill got a lot of attention early on and then kind of died off, back in the news this week after final passage in the House. This was originally written as a bill to allow non citizens to work in law enforcement. As it was amended with a striker by former Chelan County Sheriff Representative Brian Burnett of Wenatchee. Stryker kind of basically threw out the whole bill. He rewrote it for the most part. It's now in a form that he could live with, and he got several other Republicans in the House to go along with him. The problem is the bill had gotten so much bad press when it first came out that even though his striker amended it so that a non-citizen will not be able to serve in law enforcement capacity, be a firefighter, deputy prosecutor, work in Department of Corrections, but not in law enforcement. But a lot of people didn't really understand his sort of about face on the bill and getting on board behind it with this striker. So we're going to get into that. I had a conversation with him about it. He wanted to kind of say, "Hey, people are coming after me on social media. Can you make sure that they understand that, my rewrite of this bill made it something, I could live with?" So we're going to talk about that. And then the wait continues. I thought I'd have an update for you today on how things went with the press credential lawsuit. I was in federal court yesterday. This is the case where Citizen Action Defense Fund and Executive Director Jackson Maynard, representing Ari Hoffman, Brandy Cruz, Jonathan Cho, who were denied press credentials to cover the state legislature here in Olympia. That case was argued yesterday in federal court. As I mentioned, I was there. We expected to get a ruling either last night or first thing this morning, because remember, there's only a couple days left of session. They were trying to get access for the remaining days of the session. So there's some urgency here. Still waiting on that right now, but I'll tell you what went down in court yesterday and share some of that with you. So let's get into this. It has been a long couple of days for House members here in Olympia on both sides of the aisle. They started debating the income tax bill, Senate Bill 6346, at about 5:30 on Monday, late afternoon, early evening. And there were 80 amendments that were offered, most of them by Republicans, but 80 amendments in all. They went at it all night and kept going this morning. I went home. I watched on TVW, maybe some of you did too, until very late in the evening. And then when I woke up this morning and got back on TVW to see, I assumed they'd be done. I assumed there was final passage. They were still going. And it was pretty incredible. They're still in the same clothes I saw them in when I was down here yesterday. This is, again, the bill that supporters call the millionaire's tax. Opponents believe it is unconstitutional and will bleed down eventually to be a tax on everyone's income in the state of Washington, no matter how little money you make. They expect about 30,000 people or so will be impacted to contribute more than $3 billion a year for all kinds of things. Big chunk of it would go to the general fund, though. And so that's where there's a lot of concern from folks saying, okay, you expect it to make this much revenue, but what if the wealthy people all leave? What if all the business developers, don't want to, keep their domicile here, relocate their employees to another more tax friendly state? Governor Ferguson has said he's willing to sign the latest version that is on the House floor. So Republicans are basically just giving it all they've got, wanting people to know that they didn't give up without a fight. So this morning, I caught up with Representative Drew Stokesbury of Auburn. He stepped out the House floor to give me an update, and here's that conversation.
Democrats want to create a generational change in Washington's tax code, and we're going to put up a generational fight. We were sent down here to oppose an income tax. We've got 39 members. We're in the minority, but our constituents, we think deeply, deeply oppose an income tax because we know that an income tax on anyone today is going to be an income tax on everyone tomorrow. And so we think our constituents want us to use every tool at our disposal to beat back the income tax. So that's why you've seen so many amendments, so many procedural motions, so many oral roll calls. We also think that this has been rushed. We're in a 60-day supplemental session. We're supposed to deal with the state's sort of emerging needs, not do complete overhauls of our tax code. But what's even worse is the version that we're about to vote on the income tax. The version didn't even come out until last Friday. We had less than 24 hours to request amendments to the new version, less than 48 hours to draft amendments, less than 24 hours to review those amendments that were filed. There's just not enough time to do all this appropriately. Look, I'm going to oppose an income tax no matter what, but if Washington's going to have it, we shouldn't do it in a haphazard manner. And so we are trying to make this take as long as possible so that we can continue to work even in real time as the bill is being debated on the floor with our Democrat colleagues to persuade them to make changes to their bill or even vote it down entirely.
It's kind of funny. You look at the members' desks on the House floor, and you can see empty energy drink cans, Diet Coke cans, coffee cups. um, they've all been up since early Monday. And a couple of members that I spoke to Monday when I was here told me that they didn't sleep much the night before because they were working on amendments in preparation for the income tax debate. Democratic members of the House, according to a screenshot that I saw put up by Jim Berner this morning, it showed a sheet that was the nap schedule, I guess, so that certain Democratic members could step off and, catch, 20-minute nap or a couple hours of sleep and then go back onto the floor because not every member needs to speak to every single amendment, right? You don't want to you want to make sure that if it's your amendment coming to the floor that you're there, but otherwise, they kind of did a sleep shift. So some of the Republicans this morning were mocking that a little bit. They said, "We didn't take any naps. We've been here all night. We're not going anywhere." Um, Giving it all they've got. So, I wanna share with you just a little bit about a few of the amendments, and I am gonna be putting up an article this afternoon, but, one of the amendments, I'll just read this. It said to remove the sales tax on services. Remember that passed last year, a lot of what they call unintended consequences. That one was shot down. Another one offered by a Republican says if you're subject to income tax in another state, you don't have to be double taxed here in the state of Washington for your income. That one was shot down. And then one sought to expand the sales tax break on diapers and other baby products to include adult diapers. That one was also rejected. So, again, the amendments continue to be debated. Once all the amendments are done, there's going to be final speeches ahead of the vote on Senate Bill 6346. And at that point, it's likely that every member on both sides of the aisle will want to have an opportunity to speak because this is, such a significant change in tax policy in the state of Washington and, getting a lot of national attention. So I would guess it's probably going to be late afternoon before this is a done deal. But we're going to be there and we'll bring you updates on that as well. I did, though, late Monday, have a chance to catch up with Morgan Irwin. He's the government affairs vice president for the Association of Washington Business, and they're vehemently opposed to the income tax bill and very concerned that this is going to lead to businesses leaving, or at least the wealthy business owners relocating out of the state of Washington, such that the supporters might not get all the revenue they expect to generate from the income tax. So here's part of that conversation with Morgan Irwin of the Association of Washington Business.
When you are looking at their fiscal notes saying, hey, we're going to raise all of this money starting in 2029, we're just very concerned that that's not actually going to be the case. And when they don't raise as much money as they thought they were going to because people move out of the state or they devise tax shelters between now and then when they hit yet another revenue shortfall, they will look for other ways to expand this program. And that's the beginning of expanding this and making it an income tax on everybody in the state as opposed to just high wage earners. So that is part of our concern here at AWP. Really, we're focused on the employer community and how it impacts them, as opposed to some of the personal inferences. But when we look at that, this is going to hurt in the first year. It's going to hurt in the second year, and by year 3, 4, 5, I think we're going to see this expanded to everybody.
So I'll be headed back over to the House as soon as we're done with this podcast to continue observing the longest floor session in Washington state legislative history. All right, now to passage of a bill originally concerning non citizens working in law enforcement. That's how the bill was originally designed and created, and no Republicans were on board. um, Supporters of this bill, and it's substitute Senate Bill 5068. They say that expanding job eligibility is necessary to non-citizens because we have a massive shortage of law enforcement. We're lowest per capita law enforcement numbers in the entire nation. Um, so they say that we need to open up the doors to have more people. Um, when it came over to the House, Representative Brian Burnett, who's a former Chelan County sheriff, he told the chair of the House Community Safety Committee that he sits on that committee as well at the time, I'm a firm no. He said, I think for non-citizens, we just cannot go there. This is just opening up something. You can't have, a non-citizen arresting a citizen in the United States of America. He was not okay with that. Um, but at that time, the bill was likely going to sail through anyway. And so what he did is he started working on a striker amendment. And that is basically a rewrite of the entire bill. And he found a compromise that he could live with. And that basically said, okay, yeah, you can be a firefighter, you can be a deputy prosecutor, you can serve in the Department of Corrections, but you cannot, as a non citizen, work in law enforcement and have arrest powers. Um, that is the version that ended up clearing the House. It went back to the Senate, still had a lot of Republicans on that side going, what gives, Rep Burnett? You're the former sheriff. Why the heck would you support this? He got kind of skewered basically online, a lot of emails. He said people were not happy with him. So I had an opportunity to speak with him about his striker amendment and why he ultimately supported the bill and wants people to understand why he got on board with it.
I did not ever believe or support that we should have non-citizens being law enforcement officers that have the ability to arrest individuals that are citizens of the United States. So what happened was is I dropped an amendment that brought different language that would take commissioned police officers out of this, would not give them authority to be hired if they were non-citizens. And then even on top of that, we got some language in this and I just want to read it because this talks about the correction officers, yes, deputy prosecutors, and a couple other firefighters and stuff like that. But it specifically says verification of immigrant or citizenship status as a citizen of the United States or a person who is legally authorized to work in the United States under federal law. That is huge. So if you're not legally authorized under federal law to work here, you can't be hired for any of those other positions. But again, law enforcement officers with arrest powers are taking out of this.
Representative Burnett's legislative assistant told me this morning that she had a guy that drove from Monroe, all the way from Monroe, not a constituent of Rep. Burnett. He's Wenatchee, that's his district, but drove all the way from Monroe down to Olympia and sort of demanded to see Representative Burnett because he was so mad about this bill. And she said that, he sat down with this upset gentleman and kind of showed him what the Stryker Amendment did and what how the bill reads now as it has passed. He said the guy understood, got on board, followed him on social media, thanked him for his time, and There we go. So, at any rate, it's worth a look at the amended legislation and the way it passed. So, yeah, that's going to be one that I think is going to take some time for people to understand about the bill as passed versus the bill as it was originally designed. Okay, and now for I regret to inform you a non-update, really on the press credential saga. I make that sound really disinteresting, don't I? But I was in federal court on Monday in Tacoma when Jackson Maynard with Citizen Action Defense Fund argued on behalf of his clients. This is the case with Brandy Cruz, Jonathan Cho, Ari Hoffman, all having been denied press credentials to cover the legislature. You can come here as a citizen. You can even observe from the gallery up above all of the floor action. But having access to the wings of the House or Senate is where you have access to the members as they come off the floor, and you can grab them for an interview or ask them a question about something they said on the floor. And so, being a credentialed member of the media, where's my credentials? I think I've showed them to you before, but being a credentialed member of the media does give you access to these members that you've got the state legislature deciding who should have credentials and who shouldn't is a bit contentious, as we found out last year when Center Square was originally denied credentials, later given full access. But because Brandy Cruz, Ari Hoffman, Jonathan Cho are a bit of opinion journalists, they were denied. And the argument from Jackson Maynard and Citizen Action Defense Fund was there's precedent that you can't deny them just because they are opinion journalists. And he made that argument pretty eloquently during about an hour long court case. He only had, I think, about 40 of the minutes. Then the other side had some time to chat with the judge as well. Um, the Jessica Goldman was the attorney for Summit Law Group who argued for the defense, and she said they're opinion journalists, they're not entitled to credentials. She said because they've shown up and given speeches at rallies, some of them for the initiatives, and because Ari Hoffman talks about supporting the initiatives, I'm talking about the parents' rights and the one to protect girls' sports, that they've come out so openly, politically in support of those, that they're not neutral journalists. But the argument was made by Maynard that other journalists that have access um, are also working for opinionated outlets. Noted that the Seattle Times and other left leaning organizations are well represented in media here at the state capitol. So here's what Jackson Maynard shared with me just after the court arguments on Monday afternoon.
I was really pleased with the argument overall. I think the judge asked good questions. I appreciated some of the points raised by opposing counsel as well. Um, I think this case is really just about press freedom and whether or not the government has an appropriate role in determining who gets access to them to be able to do their jobs and make sure that this legislative process is transparent. And I think if the court is going to err, the court should err on the side of press freedom, on the side of transparency. And so we made that case today, and hopefully the judge will agree with us. I think, too, the real concern is that by allowing the government to decide which reporters are independent and not, you give them a tremendous amount of power to control who gets to report on them. And as I argued in court today, there should really be a kaleidoscope of different perspectives. You want opinions that are critical of policy. You want maybe some that are supportive and some that are neutral, so that the people can get at the truth. But ultimately, the government should not be the arbiter of which press gets to cover it, and that's what's at stake in this.
So the judge told all of us in the courtroom Monday afternoon that he would issue a ruling late Monday or morning Tuesday. So that has not happened as yet. Um, Jackson Maynard told me he's checking his email about every 5 minutes to see, because I guess that's how it's going to come, is just a written ruling. But so far, nothing. We will provide an update as soon as we have it, but no word as yet how that goes. Session's scheduled to end on Thursday, but I heard a couple of rumblings in the House wings this morning that because the debate over the income tax bill is taking so long, and Democrats have some other pieces of legislation that they're really hoping to get past this session, that we could be in an extra day or two here. I don't want it to be true. I'm sure lawmakers, uh, exhausted lawmakers in the House, just want this day to end. So, headed back over to the House to watch the rest of the debate and final arguments ahead of the income tax bill. It is, of course, expected to pass with very few amendments adopted so far. Um, it'll have to go back to the Senate for final reconciliation, but the governor is expected to sign that. So that's it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. I really appreciate you watching and paying attention to all this stuff, and we'll see you next time.